Depends on also what bottlenecks you're trying to get the seed past. We also had questions about the logistics for scaling up and in particular how to measure success. We heard about different ways of marking or identifying the seed that had been put out into the field, but how could we actually monitor that and what would work best in our species? We also talked a bit about the fuzzy ropes or the potential for passive enhancement and see that as a potential direction to test in the future in Maine, but also could be done in a designated research area in federal waters. And then lastly, we talked about how the goals of aquaculture and the fishery can differ, but there are definitely synergies there that we should work to identify more and see what we can leverage to work together in the future.
Thank you. All those great thoughts and energy. Okay. Mary Beth, are you the one? I see notes.
That would be me. So, I think people have touched on many of the thoughts that we have, but I'll add a few. And on seed production, clearly temperature appeared to be quite critical. Labor intense, both actually for both seed production and planting and transporting. There's a lot of labor intense activity there, which comes with cost. So, while things certainly seem to be the ability to scale up is there, but how does that, the economics of actually doing production on a larger scale pan out? So I think, I think that's probably occurred to everybody in this room who's in the fishery. For the planting and transplanting, current efforts really have been, in the Gulf of Maine, and so there was a reference to that at the very beginning. But we didn't feel that it's limited to the Gulf of Maine. I think that there's been a lot of activity that's gone on. We have a lot to learn, but we see scallops grow outside of that area, and that whole near shore versus offshore temperature and it just highlights how much we have to learn. And I think it's quite a lot. The issues of, how do you create a system where people can invest? What are the incentives for that investment? And how, if you step up and decide to go down that path, how is, access to that resource, follow? What's the follow through? So we have many things to learn and many structures to consider. There's a lot of possibility here. It's not going to happen overnight, and we'll have to figure out where we want to start.
Thank you, Mary Beth. And I'll go to the center of the room. Who's reporting out? Togue.
Thank you. Togue Braun with Down East Dayboat. So we started out talking about just, obviously we're so impressed with everything that was said yesterday and what's been accomplished across the globe, but then just imagining how are we going to make that work here in the US in the federal management regime where it needs to work. So we're looking forward to this afternoon's conversations. There was a discussion of how it's really good that France was able to seemingly solve the Vibrio problem, which as someone that has not worked with hatcheries, I didn't realize was a big problem, but apparently it is. And how we could possibly do that here. But then that got us into a discussion of seed produced in hatcheries versus seed collected from the wild. They're two very different operations. And a couple of us were here asking, like, do we need hatcheries? I asked Marston, has there ever been a year without a set of spat? And he said no. So do we actually need to have hatcheries or not? So that's a question. There was a discussion of, if we are going to be collecting spat from the wild, that's probably going to be collected in Maine, but then will we be bringing it perhaps to the mid-Atlantic? If there's a recruitment problem down there, could adults from Maine survive down there? And then there was a discussion of genetics. And then I thought Marston made an interesting point about the biotoxin problem. If we are going to be relying on seed collected in the wild, we need to make sure that the folks that are doing it can survive economically. And the biotoxin monitoring is very expensive. And obviously you'll see our biases here, but the money that's going into hatchery all the hatcheries could pay for all of the biotoxin tests so that we could get the market going, so there would be more wild spat collected by more people that are economically viable in aquaculture. So just interesting, two very different paths of aquaculture and enhancement, and we all need to work together, but there's a lot of possibility.
Excellent. Thank you, Togue. And I think this was the last table. Jonathan.
All right, we'll wrap it up. So Jonathan Piros on New England Council staff. I think a lot of what we discussed has already been mentioned, so I'll try to focus on a couple key points. We really recognize the wide range of expertise that was brought together here, and I think we also noted some of the differences in the species. So a couple comments about placopectin. We said it was fickle and sensitive, and that the Canadian experience and some of the best practices learned there might be most applicable going forward in the short term. We like the idea of reduced labor. We noted the challenges with cooperation. One of the challenges we see is with vertical lines. I think that was already mentioned, but talked a little bit about opportunities to use space within offshore wind arrays and some of the other competing uses for fishing in the outer continental shelf. We like the idea of fuzzy rope. We saw value in both continuing to focus on seed rearing and spat collection and moving both of those forward. But noting that there's still work to do in the seed rearing technology, seed rearing space. On resources, we focused on how much financing and space do you need to do this at scale? What is the investment time to be profitable? I think Phil mentioned that a little bit. And then just a last point, Leslie Ann mentions Yamaha Journal 34. I wanted to give a shout out to James Fletcher, who's been coming to management meetings for about 20 years, telling us to pay attention to that. So there you go, Jim.